And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Bubba and the Bat Flip. It only took me 68 episodes to figure that one out. Bubba and the Bat Flip, episode 68, our early relief pitcher preview. We waited a few weeks to do it. There's a little more clarity, still a lot of uncertainty. We'll kind of try to navigate through for everybody with the listener questions and some just deeper dives into the rosters of some of these question mark teams. You can check me out on Twitter at BDentric, and my co-host is always the Bat Flip portion of the podcast on Twitter at BatFlipCrazy. Toby, how we doing, man?
I'm doing pretty well, Bubba. Is this going to be a relief pitcher show, or are we talking about why the Blue Jays should trade Vlad Jr.? I can't.
And we just lost everybody. That's great.
Everybody's off. Everybody's gone. They all just left. Oh man. No, I'm actually excited for the relief pitchers thing. I think there's just it's a lot of opportunity for, it's a lot of volatility, if you will. But I think there's opportunities within that. So I'm very excited. Yeah, unlike Vlad, who is Vlad Jr., who's not volatile at all, just same 50% plus ground ball rate every single year, and lack of super high exit velocity on his line drives and fly balls, which you can tell by his totally normal home run per fly ball rate. But we'll talk relief pitchers for sure. I'm just kidding, of course. I just tweeted about it. I'm like a silent troll of Vlad Jr., although I have nothing wrong with him as a human. I just think he's overrated.
Yeah, no, that's Toby's little fun spot on the Twitter. Just remember, Toby's comments have nothing to do to reflect upon me. No, just kidding.
It's like in your Twitter bio when you're like, retweets are not endorsements. You're like, yes. The fact I'm on the podcast with this guy I do not condone anything he says. Don't listen to anything he says, especially Blue Jays fans. I'm a Blue Jays fan.
Yeah, he's wearing the Blue Jays hat to make everybody just throw off the scent. So
I'm a Marcus Semien fan. You could say.
These guys just keep doing it. Now go trade for some pitching. So it's going to be fun in Toronto, well, in Dunedin possibly this year. So we'll see how that goes. But they're at least making moves. Your boy JT Realmuto re-signed with the Phils. So the hot stove's cooking today. It's been a fun hot stove day. And I tweeted about it. I said, you know what? Maybe there's a sense of urgency with pitchers and catchers reporting in a few weeks that we might actually start spring training on time. Let's fill out some rosters. Maybe.
Totally. Yeah. I don't know if I'm the only person, but every time I see Dunedin, I think about Crocodile Dundee. I don't know if I'm the only person who does that, but
I'll be honest, I do not, but I get it.
Okay,
I get it.
Did you watch Crocodile Dundee back in the day?
Oh yeah. I love Crocodile. Right. I watched Crocodile Dundee 2. They only had 2, I think, maybe 3. But I know I watched 1 and 2. 1's much better than 2, like usual. But definitely watched that. How good was it? Was it Paul Hogan?
Is that his name?
I think that was his real life name. Yes. So
I just know him as Crocodile Dundee.
Yes, he was amazing. Absolutely good stuff. Basically, the caveman of the alligator world. All right, so let's talk relief pitchers. Like usual in our previews, top 10 NFBC ADP. We're doing draft champions from January 1st. So we got the top 10 there. We'll talk about a couple targets from the 11 through 20 range. And then instead of just going deep flyers, we're going to go over the rest of the rosters of teams that have so many questions in play, because there's a bunch of them, and your listener questions circled around some of them. So we'll get to those, and we'll get to your listener questions, and hopefully get at least an idea of relief pitching. And as Toby said, there's a lot of volatility, but it's kind of a risk reward also if you want to take the chances in drafts right now, because I know Toby's doing drafts, I'm doing drafts, and you get to a point in the draft and you see certain names, you're like, should I take the chance now? Because it could pan out. Like people that took chances on Kirby Yates or Brad Hand, like him or not, where you got him a couple weeks ago, you're not going to ever get him again. So it just makes things different. But let's kick it off. The top relief pitcher going off the board, Josh Hader, around pick 57 right now. The only thing that's really questionable for me about Josh Hader is he might get traded, but that's a big maybe. So what's your thoughts on Hader, Toby?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously he's very good. I don't think there's any question about that. From a skills perspective, we did see some drop last year, and a drop to a 16% swinging strike rate, which was the lowest in his career. So I think Hader's fine. I mean, he's good. If he is assuming he gets the saves, I agree. Like the concern is that them trading him. I mean, now would be an opportune time to do that. His 4th season, he's still got a little bit more run before he becomes a free agent. But they put a lot of miles on that arm, and based on what he did last year, maybe a little bit of concern there. So that's my biggest thing. But where he goes, he'll probably be the closer. So, again, with all these guys, I'm not going to be super excited because my general strategy with closers is not to go after the top ones. But it doesn't mean that they're good, that they aren't good pitchers.
Yeah, I'm not completely against going after 1 or 2 up top, but Hader's one I usually don't go after. Let's put it that way, because this is basically a 4th-round pick 57. We know we talked starting pitching early. You like your JTR or some speed. I like some speed and power. It's usually not a spot where I reserve myself to go for a closer, but there's been drafts where it looks a little more appealing right now with such question marks in play. But Hader's just not a guy I'm going with. There were a few slip-ups towards the end of last season, a small sample. But still, when he's on, he's one of the most elite pitchers in baseball. There's no arguing that. He's going to be the closer wherever he goes, pretty much like you said. So if you're a take closer early guy, I got no problem with it. He's also one of those guys that, he can give you – he usually, not always, gives you more than 1 inning save, so he can rack up more strikeouts and do that kind of good stuff. So in 2019, 61 games, 75 innings. 2018, 55 games, 81 innings. 2017, 35 games, 47 innings. So he's going deep. But last year, only 21 games, 19 innings. Maybe something changed. I don't know. But something to keep an eye on if he's not giving you those multi-inning upside things. The Brewers, how good are they really going to be? There's just question marks taking him that early in the draft that really not something I'm running to do right now. But the next one I am slightly intrigued by, and that's Liam Hendriks, the second one off the board. Going down pick 62, so only 5 picks after Hader. But, sign with the White Sox, elite stuff, questions about, back-to-back years of big inning workloads. We talked about that before. What's your thoughts on Hendriks? Good team, but, early draft pick as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm with a lot of people. I think if I were to grab an early closer, I would focus on Hendriks. I think the situation he's found himself is pretty optimal. Obviously, he's leaving the friendly confines of Oakland Coliseum, which, I think is probably the best pitcher's park in all of baseball. So that's certainly a little bit of a bump to him. But, 2 consecutive years with an ERA under 1.8. He doesn't walk guys. That may be a big difference between him and Hader. I mean, Hader, again, short season, but 13% walk rate with the home runs he gives up is a little bit of a concern. Where you look at Hendriks, his walk rate was 3.3% last year, 6.3%, in 2019, just absolutely elite stuff. So I think if you do pony up early on for a closer, I think Hendriks seems like the safest guy to me, which of course is famous last words for a closer. But I really, I think of everybody, Hendriks is my favorite.
Yeah, no, he's definitely my favorite as well. There's really no question that there's anyone's going to take the job from him. Like in Milwaukee, you could see at times Counsell using, Hader in a high leverage spot, and then here comes, Devin Williams to get the save. Like that wouldn't shock people if Devin Williams had 10 plus saves. But in Chicago, Hendriks is pitching the ninth. Like La Russa's, as much as we want to make fun of La Russa, he's old school, and Hendriks has one job, and that's to shut down games. So that's not going to be a question. The only concern I have, if I have to play devil's advocate, and I really have no concerns with Hendriks, the strikeout stuff's great and everything, is he's more so of a fly ball pitcher than a ground ball pitcher. 32%, 31% the last couple of years. He was a 40% or so guy before that. Changing those ballparks could aid to a few more fly balls. Keep that in mind, but still, as a whole, there's not too much to just kind of grasping at straws with Hendriks. He'd definitely be my top guy off the board as well. All right, the third one out of New York, Aroldis Chapman, pick 74, is going to be a round later than Liam Hendriks. Chapman's been one of the most consistent closers in baseball over the last 4 or 5 years, and it really doesn't seem like there's much that's going to slow him down besides himself. So what's your thoughts on Chapman?
Yeah, I mean, the only issues for Chapman are really age and some injury related stuff. I mean, I guess it's not really injury related, but when you're older and the last couple years, the volume hasn't necessarily been there, but absolutely dominant when he played in 2020. really good in 2019. And I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, he was also much better in the second half of 2019. So he's got everything you want. He's got a good situation. He's got a history of being successful in every single year that he's pitched. I mean, the highest ERA he's ever had is 3.22 back in 2017. Highest WHIP, 1.13, back in 2017, unless we go back to 2011 with the Reds. So, there's a lot to like. And again, it's just one of those situations where kind of rolling the dice with some relief pitchers. And there's going to be a year where that isn't his year, but I don't necessarily see anything that points to this being the end of the road for Chapman at all.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's one of those, if you are a closer early guy and you don't get Hendricks, I have no problem with Chapman. He's going to be 33 years old, but the Yankees have done a good job of kind of monitoring his innings. Since 2016, he hasn't thrown more than 58 innings. Like, they're really slow playing him for the most part. He's had 30 or more saves in every season since 2012 except one. That was 2017, the years you mentioned, with his worst ERA and his worst WHIP and his lowest strikeouts. Like, that was just a bad season, and he still wasn't bad. It just wasn't a Chapman-type season. Other than that, he's been one of the best, if not the best closer, consistency-wise in all of baseball. He's going to be playing on the Yankees, which is going to be one of the best teams in baseball yet again, scoring tons of runs, tons of save chances. Britton and some other guys might sneak in a save chance here or there to give Chapman some rest like we've seen. But all in all, this dude is going to be as lights out as they come. I don't see anything slowing him down until, God forbid, some injury takes place, which is just the way they take care of him and the way he does things. I don't see it happening. That's the weird part. So Chapman at pick 74. If you don't get Hendricks, but you still want a guy early, I have zero. He'd be a priority. If you're a closer early guy, I'd be trying to get either or of Hendricks or Chapman in that early going. That'd be a top priority for me. 3 picks after Chapman, there's some Edwin Diaz love back in the draft pool. 2 years removed from a slow go of it. Last year looked better. Now it looks like people are back on board at pick 77. What about you, Toby?
Yeah, I mean, the skills are off the charts. 21.2% swinging strike rate for him. Struck out 50 in 25 innings last year. The ERA was great. Everything was great about it, right? I think 2019 was pretty clearly a fluke just from a home run to fly ball and home run per 9 perspective. So I think there's nothing not to like. I just think, again, among closers, he's very, very good. I think there's some question marks that I've seen with people about whether he gets saves or not, which seems to be more in like kind of team philosophy and approach than it does, about necessarily question marks around him because, they treated him weird last year. It's like they kind of removed him from the closer role for a little bit, but you just look at what he was able to accomplish. There's very few relief pitchers who can do what he did. The quality of contact has to be a concern. 2 consecutive years of BABIP's higher than 377, but the home run rate was under control again. So I think he's totally fine. Again, I think with all these picks, it's just a question of, kind of, is this what you want to be spending your draft capital on at this point in drafts? So that's why if I'm lacking in kind of emotion and energy around these guys, it's because I'll get energetic around the guys going after like ADP of 200. But these guys, it's like, I'm signing a guy for saves,
AKA Toby takes closers later. That's the moral of the story here. But Edwin Diaz, like Toby mentioned, the stuff we talked about it in last year's preview, that even though he had a down 2019, if you look at the peripheral stats, he was still very good. He just, quote unquote, got unlucky, made a few mistakes. I think we broke it down. It was like 3 appearances out of his his 66 games ruined his entire season. It was crazy in 2019. 2020, that did not happen. So it was good to see him bounce back. He might have been even better than he was in 2018 if you really want to break it down. And I don't see that changing much. Yeah, they signed Trevor May, and that kind of scares a few people. They had Dylan Betances. There's guys in the back end, but I think he's got to slip up pretty good to lose that job. It's Edwin Diaz's job, and it's going to be a good job because the Mets are getting much better. So it's going to be a good spot to get saves. So again, if you want to go early, sure, but I'd rather have Chapman or Hendricks over Diaz. But last year I liked Diaz a lot more because he was going much later, but not so much this year. Now,
and one thing I think that's important about what you pointed out and kind of leads to my skepticism about relief pitchers generally is, with Diaz, it's like every year, your closers are going to have those situations where either luck isn't on their side or they're having a rough inning and they load the bases. Those edge of your seat situations where the base is loaded, 2 outs, and you need your guy to get that save when the other team hits a homer. And that happened to Diaz in a few games where I think he gave up home runs with runners on base. And for a relief pitcher, that can skew your ERA for an entire season, even in an 162 game season. And so that, I think, when it comes to the variance that any pitcher is susceptible to, and the lack of an ability to really have a long enough sample size to regress that back to the mean, is just one of those situations that every pitcher, bar a couple of the ones we talked about, like Chapman maybe, are going to encounter throughout their career. And you just hope that it's not your season where that happens.
Yeah, and we'll definitely elaborate on that some more on a listener question from Torres about having extra relief pitchers certain weeks and whatnot. There's a strategy involved in that. But you look at Diaz, like you said, in 2019, a 26.8% home run to fly ball. Last year, 13.3. Year before that, 10.6, 14.3. So it was a massive jump, like 2.33 home runs per 9, never better than 1.36, usually 1 or less. So he got lit up in 2019, and that was shown in the stats we looked at. When he missed in the sweet spot. So it was not good. But and he just takes 1 or 2 of those outings, and boom goes the dynamite. So we'll see how that goes, but still very, very good stuff with Edwin Diaz. The next guy, 5th guy off the board, Raisel Iglesias, new member of the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, pick 84. This one stings because I love Raisel, especially with the Reds where he go multiple innings. Not sure exactly how Joe Maddon's going to handle that, but we usually didn't see that from Joe Maddon in the past. And he's also going a lot higher than he usually does. So what's your thoughts on Iglesias?
Yeah, Iglesias is nice. I mean, I think, again, it's one of these, like, I feel like the way we talk about these guys year in, year out highlights a little bit of the volatility. I think it was last year, a lot of people had concerns about, Iglesias and felt like maybe he was falling a little bit. Well, all of a sudden in 2020, he bumps up his velocity to the highest it's ever been at 96.2. He improves across the board. I mean, he's got a pretty deep repertoire for a relief pitcher. But, I mean, the swinging strike rate, 18.6%, highest of his career. K-minus walk rate, 28.6%, highest of his career. O-swing, 36.8%, highest of his career. Z-contact, 72.6%, best of his career. And then he puts up these just absolutely phenomenal numbers. And I think one of the things that I love about Iglesias a lot, I think it's pretty clear, obviously, that he's the closer in Anaheim. Maybe I'll end up looking foolish in that's wrong. But here's a guy who, I mean, I guess he only threw his pitches, he threw the sinker a little bit, but he's got, 4-seam fastball generated an 11% swinging strike rate, which is solid, not spectacular for a reliever. But then he's got his slider at 24.2%, changeup at 27% with a 60% O swing, so he's got pitches to attack both hitters. He's got that repertoire. The Angels are a decent situation. So I like him a lot. I mean, when we're talking about like relative value for closers, where's he going at ADP wise? He's going at 84. It's still so early. It's still so early. So I would never draft him, I don't think, but I do like Iglesias a lot. I think he's got a lot going for him.
Well, one of the reasons I always liked Iglesias was the price tag, like you mentioned. This time around, it's a little sooner, so it's a little trickier. But one thing I said earlier in Cincinnati, he'd go multiple innings. You prefer him to close, and he closed most games, but he also come in high leverage. So he'd always have like the chance to get more wins than usual. Like he was 4-3 last year on a shortened season with 8 saves. Like that's awesome from a closer. The year before, 3-12 with 34 saves. So he's in high leverage spots a lot, and it's just one of those deals. Last year, that 2019 season, the highest ERA he had since 2015. Usually a low ERA guy, decent ratios, good strikeouts. Keeps the ball in the ballpark, which is impressive for pitching a lot of games in Great American Small Park. It's just one of those deals with Rossielli. I think he's a very, very underappreciated pitcher, and he got the bump this year. I think more so because he was one of the locked-in guys early on in draft season. There wasn't as many question marks. He was either going to close for Cincinnati or he's closing for Anaheim now. It was never really in question, where there's been other guys we've seen ADPs fluctuate quite a bit based on recent acquisitions. So I love Rossielli Iglesias. It's one of those for me, if you want to get pitching early and just knock it out and be done with it, Hendricks or Chapman and Rossielli Iglesias, to get two of those three, and I'd be a happy camper. At the same time, like Toby will tell you right out the gate, you're probably letting a lot of stuff go that you really want on your team. So it's really tricky to do that. Like it's not impossible, not impossible at all, but it's very, very tricky. All right, the next one is one I have not drafted at all, and he's the sixth relief pitcher off the board at pick 96, and that is James Karinchak of the Cleveland baseball team. So what's your thoughts on Mr. Karinchak, Toby?
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand this one for a couple of reasons. First is I don't understand why Cleveland would put him in the closer role. I just think like the incentives financially to keep him out of that spot, especially for a team like Cleveland that has, I mean, their payroll is like $28 million, I think this year is what I saw today, like just ridiculous. So they're going to try to save costs at any turn. And so I would not be surprised to see them go with other alternatives to Karinchak. And then the other thing for me is just, obviously the strikeouts are absurd and the stuff is absurd. But, that walk rate, 14.7%, over 5 walks per 9. His home run per 9 last year was 0.33, thanks to a 5.6% home run per fly ball rate, which does not seem sustainable. And on top of that, I mean, his ground ball rate last year was 23.1%. So he's giving up a ton of fly balls. Maybe and I mean I should actually look and see what we got.
A heck of a BABIP too to go with it.
Yeah, I mean that's what makes me wonder. So it's like, yeah, I mean he only gave up 1 barrel, so small sample size. So maybe you guys are having trouble, lining it up against him, which wouldn't necessarily be surprising. But anytime you walk that number of guys, I just it's a little bit too dangerous for me. So I just think the combination of financial incentives for the team being for him not to get saves, and then the profile I just think is going to be super volatile. I don't know why to invest a top 100 pick in this guy. If you want to snag a closer who's really good, I mean, I'd much rather have like a Diaz or Iglesias or somebody like that. So if you're actually going to spend up, that's what I would be kind of focusing on. But I mean, to each their own. He could be an absolutely lights out closer, but I just don't think the risk is worth the reward.
Well, and it goes back to what you said about Diaz when we talked about it just takes, 1 bad inning or 2 or a couple home runs here and there. If you're walking the amount of guys he's walking, you're asking for a trouble. Like you throw a couple guys on for free, like maybe they don't hit you hard, but you let them on for free, and then you groove one, and now you're just like, oh no, like this just gets real bad real quick. So that's always concerning. I'm with you on the fact this is a very cheap baseball team that, there's already discussion that Andres Jimenez is going to start in the minors to save money. So it makes sense, like you said, is you don't let Karinchak close right away. So when arbitration comes around, he's worth less money. It's like the Yankees did with Dylan Betances all those years. Like it's not. It wouldn't surprise anybody if that happened. And there's other pitchers in this bullpen that we'll talk about later on that I know I targeted. I think you've even targeted some of them in drafts. That it makes too much sense to it makes too much sense for the Indians to screw this up basically, and it makes it very tough. Like I'm going through his pitch leaderboard page, and it's like his numbers they check out, but it's mainly like that just quality of contact. His dynamic, whoa. Let's back this train up. Dynamic hard hit rate's 20.5%. That is not good. Not good at all. So, hard hit rate 36%. Okay, but dynamic 20.5. That's not ideal. So that's something that stood out as a deciding factor. and that barrel rate of 2.5%, he had a deserved barrel rate of 9%. So there's definitely some, he still looked really good. Like, you look at some of these numbers, still pretty darn good stuff. Deserved ERA of 2.02, barrel flip of 132. Like, stuff looks good, but there's definitely question marks that, like you said, if you're going to go early for a closer, get Iglesias, get Diaz, do something like that instead of a guy like Karinchak. So that's about it there. Nothing. I wouldn't be shocked if this time next year we talk about him being something pretty good. All right, the seventh closer off the board here at pick 108 for the Houston Astros, Ryan Pressly. He actually was pretty darn good last year in the once he took over due to all the injuries, and he looks to be locked in as the closer going into 2021 on an Astros team that, Michael Brantley's back. They're still going to make some noise here and there. So what's your thoughts on Pressly at pick 108?
Yeah, I think Presley's really solid. Nothing spectacular. His whip was high last year, but he also ran a really high BABIP against. So I'm forgiving him for the home run he gave up to Ronald Guzman in the last game of the season. That cost me a little bit, but I think Pressly, or I think second to last game of the season. I think I needed a win in that game. Not that my memory goes back that far or thinks about those things. But yeah, I think he's all around super solid. I can't really quibble with anything in the profile. I love the fact that he generates a really high chase rate, 40%. I think the last couple years, I think it's his curve that's really dominant pitch, has been. I remember when the Astros got him from the Twins, everybody was kind of saying how great a move that was because he had the pieces to be elite. I think he is elite, and I agree. I think Houston's a great situation because it's a really good team. You're playing out west where the ballparks are a little bit nicer, and Minute Maid, is this still called Minute Maid?
I think so. Yes, okay. It is.
Yeah. So Minute Maid, I think it's a great pitcher's park. So I think everything's good for Pressly.
Yeah, and the other thing for Pressly is there's no one to really take the job from him. There's Anoli Paredes, there's Pedro Baez, there's Blake Taylor, Josh James. Like, none of those scream Ryan Pressly's losing his job. Like, it's pretty much his deal, which once we keep talking about guys as we get farther down the list here, there's a lot of question marks involved. So I think that's very important. Astros will still be very good in that division, dominating strikeout stuff like you mentioned, limits the contact 3.7% barrel rate last year. There's definitely a lot to like there with Ryan Pressly. So as long as he limits the walks, that's when he got in trouble. It was when he was walking guys, 3 walks per 9, not ideal, but that's like the worst he's had in a long time in his career. So maybe that was just hopefully a one-time thing, and he bounces back from that next season. All right, the 8th closer out the board at pick 115. And this one, it's getting tough for Toby. I was all about drafting me some Kenley Jansen last year. Then we saw how the Dodgers, they treated Kenley Jansen like he was a starter. Like, let's pitch him every few days and see how it goes. So what's your take on Jansen here at pick 115?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I'm doing a little bit of a dive here on just his rolling average graph to see what was going on. Towards the end of the season a little bit, some of his numbers regressed because over the course of the full season, he was very good. There's really nothing I can pinpoint in the profile that's concerning at all. ERA 3.33, WHIP 115, 33 strikeouts in 24 innings, 32.4% strikeout rate, best in 3 years, 23.5% K- walk rate, 15% swinging strike, really solid O swing at 37.8%. So essentially, like, everything that you're seeing in the profile is good. He's had really good StatCast metrics for a couple years in a row now. Low barrel rate, very low average exit velocity, very low hard hit rate. So everything in the profile points to just, Kenley being Kenley. But then we have the playoffs and what happened there and his kind of inability to navigate that. But with the Dodgers, I think they still go back to them. They haven't signed a replacement really. I don't think Blake Trinan is that guy as much as it might disappoint Brian Slack in particular, because I know he's a big fan. But yeah, I think the Dodgers will stick with him. I think this year, there's no there's no reason not to, essentially, like during a regular season where I think the Dodgers will be really good and they're going to be successful. I just don't necessarily see them being forced to move away from him unless he really struggles. And he's not going to face the same type of competition as he did in the playoffs in the regular season. So, yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, I'm with you there. It's one of those, I think they, like I mentioned with Chapman, they might kind of baby his innings a little bit because they do have Trinan, they have Knable, they have Brewster, Gratterall, they have guys that can, put an inning in. Like Baez, I think last year got a handful of saves for the Dodgers. So you wouldn't be shocked because when a team wins 100 games, he can't save them all. So that's just the way it's going to go. But he can still save you 30 plus at this point. And looking at his X stats on the pitch leaderboard, and he's actually, he was unlucky if you look at a lot of the stats here. Barrels should have been less. ERA should have been less. A lot of the contacts, they still had a 31% CSW, which is really good for a guy that people were concerned that he wasn't really dominating people. I guess the biggest question mark you mentioned looking at his rolling graphs, he had a 25% ground ball rate last year, usually in the 30s, low 30s to mid 30s for the most part. So that's slightly concerning, but even with that, he had one of his better home run per fly balls of his career. So that's pretty interesting. Like you said, strikeout rate was still good. Really not a ton to peak at. Just the walks were up, less ground balls. Just kind of got a little unlucky, but overall it was still pretty darn good. So it's interesting to see what they do with him. There's always the health concerns. People are worried about his arm towards the end of last year. So something to think about. But I'd imagine they'll kind of baby him like they did last year, but that could still run into 25 to 30 saves. So that's pretty darn good, all things considered.
Yeah, and I don't think they really have like somebody. I'm probably missing who it would be, but to come in like Gratterall, like he had a 14% strikeout rate last year. Like he's not the answer. I mean, Trinan similarly had a very low strikeout rate. They've got like some of those lefties. They've got Ferguson. They got McGee. I don't know if he's a free agent or not, but he was really good last year. But those are more situational type guys for them. So they have a deep bullpen, but I don't know if it's full of like closer types, Yeah. So I actually, after this conversation, I feel a little better about it. Maybe Kenley's I can't say he's a value at 115, but I think maybe if he drops a little bit in drafts, he could be a good one to snag.
He'll be one to monitor for sure because the Dodgers always find a way to make things interesting. That's all I know. So, but I'm with you. He's the best option. There's no doubting that.
For sure.
Minnesota Twins, Taylor Rogers, pick 129. He had a rocky season last year. Strikeouts were still decent. Ground balls were okay, but you still get a decent amount of fly balls and home runs. The ERA was a little high. He lost his job for a while, but they got him penciled in to be the closer going into 2021. So what's your thoughts on Rogers?
Yeah, I think we've seen over the last couple years that the Twins aren't really that committed to Rogers as the closer. I don't know. This is one of those situations where you have a closer who I think has really good skills. I think Rogers is really good. The swinging strike rate doesn't necessarily blow you away, but I think he's got a good CSW. I think he's always been more a CSW guy than a swinging strike rate guy. 22% came on his walk rate. The BABIP and the strand rate were crazy, unlucky. The Z contact, that does raise a little bit of concerns, not being able to get guys out inside the zone. But it's one of these scenarios where I think the Twins are going to work their bullpen like they have in the past, which maybe he gets the bulk of saves. But, they're going to bring in a righty if that feels like it's the best situation. It's not going to be Romo, but they have Duffy, who's really good back there. They just signed Hansel Robles, and I know, like, obviously I'm very biased on Hansel Robles, but he wasn't. Once he regained his velocity, he was a better pitcher last year with the Angels. And the Twins do good things with pitchers. They know how to maximize pitcher potential, I think, and so I could see those guys kind of nibbling at some of the saves for Rogers. And if he does struggle at all, I don't think they're going to feel compelled to keep him in the role. So he's like a prime example of a guy who I think I don't know if the upside is really that high, and I think the downside is pretty low. And in those scenarios, I'm always going to try to target, the second half of those potential committees, because if you miss out on them, not a huge deal. But if you hit on them, it's a game changer for you.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And one thing with Taylor Rogers, we know with the Twins, they use him in high leverage situations. They use him for multi-inning saves. Like you said, there's going to be a lot of days where he doesn't even pitch because he's used like for 2 innings in like 2 or 3 days in a row. And that's where I love that Robles call when he was signed. I'm like, this could be good because we talked about it a lot last year. He was a lot better towards the end of last year, like you mentioned. So I wouldn't count that out at all. Like that's definitely in play when it comes to the Twins. So this is where we start to get to the murky spots. Like, we talked about 8 guys that 7 of the 8, we'll take Krenchek out of the loop there, that we feel relatively confident are going to be closers right now. Like they're going to be the closer for their team. Now we get into question marks, and it gets much more different. So Taylor's a guy I just haven't been finding myself drafting at all. It's been tough. Like I'm with you. The stuff's very, very good. It's just tough for me to pencil in the trust factor with the Twins to make it happen, and hopefully nothing went wrong. But man, you look at his numbers, and he got hit around quite a bit last year. So it's definitely a telling situation. The 10th closer off the board at pick 139 is a guy I will not draft anywhere at all. And he just got signed by the Washington Nationals to potentially close for them. That is Brad Hand. Toby, any interest in a guy like Brad Hand?
It's interesting. His velocity is way down. I think that's been pretty well documented. And the skills also took a nosedive last year. All the skill. Well, I should say like all the skills except for number one, the ones that count, right?
Yeah.
And number 2, he maintained a 29% K- walk rate despite 3% dip in his swinging strike rate. The control metrics just totally fell off. And I think that might be a little bit of a situation where, over a course of a longer season, like he had a 4.7% walk rate last year, even though his first pitch strike rate was down, his O swing was way down. So, I think you're looking at, I don't know if you have it in front of you, but I'm sure his deserved walk rate, from Alex Chamberlain's pitch leaderboards is way, way higher than that. So, there's just some skill concerns here. Obviously, I'll be interested to see where that ADP kind of ends up, because it is a fairly nice situation with the Nationals. It sounds like he actually gave up more money to go to the Nationals because he was going to be their closer. And so that gives you the confidence that he's at least, going to start the season in that position and should have a pretty deep, should have, a little bit of a leash there. So, again, like the skills don't overwhelm me, but one of the things that I've kind of done in the past, and I targeted, Alex Colomé for this reason. I targeted Mark Melancon for this reason last year as well. It's just trying to get guys who maybe people are off of them because the skills aren't as good, but they've never really been bad before. Like if you look at Hand, his ERAs the last 5 seasons, 2.92, 2.16, 2.75, 3.3, 2.05. His whips the last, 5 seasons, 0.77, 1.24, 1.11, 0.93, 1.11. Like, regardless of what his skills what they have been, like he's always been good. And so maybe he's a guy where, like, if you were to ask me value proposition, do you want Brad Hand, we're going where he's going right now, versus one of these guys, further up the draft board, I'd probably go with Hand, just because I think he's been successful. Yes, there are concerns with the skill and the velocity, but until teams show that they can really get to him, then, go with the consistency and just hope.
And hope. Yeah, a couple things. Like Melancon last year was much later in drafts, I believe, so that made more sense to me then. But it's just with Hand, that velocity is only going to fool people for so long for me. Could be totally wrong. Plus, I really like Tanner Rainey with Washington. I think that's a guy that should have been closing, so kind of bummed when Hand got there. So I think he's kind of waiting for Hand to screw up. And then I got the leaderboard up here, like a 284 Will Bacon, 335 X Will Bacon. His deserved walks was 8.9% compared to the 4.7% he actually had. His barrel rate was up an extra 1.2 from the deserved barrel situation, so he got a little lucky there as well. Not that he's getting the job done. Everything he said isn't wrong. It's like if I'm going to take a chance on a guy that I'm waiting for that to happen, it'll be later in the draft, and that's just the way I look at it. You look at some of these numbers. A lot of fly balls. He was getting, to me, pretty lucky with that, like a 19.4% ground ball rate. That's going to be tough to sustain the goods there. So I'll be passing on Brad Hand, and that's just maybe I'll miss out on that. I had him last year, and I was nervous as hell when I had him last year, but and he got the job done. I think he led the league in saves, or was like second in the league in saves. So it worked out last year. I think I'll be avoiding it this year, but we'll see. We'll see. You'll probably be right. You usually are, but we'll see how that goes. He lived on the called strikes. That's the one thing. 10.7% swinging strike, 21.2% called strike. We'll see how much that continues on. All right. Picks 11 through 20. We're going to give 2 targets each here. It goes Nick Anderson, Rosenthal, Devin Williams, Colomé, Kimbrel, Rafael Montero, Matt Barnes, Richard Rodriguez, Kirby Yates, and Will Smith, who's technically not even the closer for Atlanta, but he's getting drafted way ahead of the closer for Atlanta. So who is one of the guys you're looking at in this range, Toby?
Yeah, Kimbrel has been a target of mine, a little bit at least. I mean, he's pushing up in drafts already. I think when draft day comes around, he'll probably be around the 150 point, if not maybe a little ahead of that. He struggled out of the gate, I mean, horrendously. Those of us who had him on any teams really felt those walks and earned runs he was giving up. But after those initial struggles, he really turned it around. I mean, over his last 10 games, he had a 50% strikeout rate. His walk rate fell all the way down to 11.8%. So, again, his O swing got a lot better, which I think is critical. One of the reasons why he really struggled with walks is because his O swing was down so much. So, I mean, it came on his walk rate of, 48.5 or something like that, over that period of time. No, I made that up. 38.5 over that period of time. The skills were there. He was really good. He's with the Cubs. He's in the NL Central. He's got that contract, so he's going to be the closer at least initially for them. So that kind of checks all the boxes I'm looking for. And again, like outside of last year, I think he's been good, like pretty much every other year that he's pitched. And again, this isn't like I'm not trying to say that just because they haven't been bad before that they can't be bad again. He was bad his first year with the Cubs. So it's been a couple years since he was actually good. So maybe I should reframe that, but only 40 innings of work. And both times, I think with an abbreviated spring. So I like Kimbrel. I would be perfectly fine with him as my kind of closer one, just because I think he'll get an opportunity. He has the skills to succeed, and I think he's in a good situation, generally speaking. So.
Yep, I'm 100% with you. That was my number one as well. The second half, or his second half, as you mentioned, basically when he got demoted to go work on his stuff, everything was phenomenal. You listed it. Velocity was up. Strikeouts were through the roof. He was shutting guys down. Really nothing to complain about when it comes to Kimbrel. Should be locked in as the closer because there's really no one in Chicago that scares me to do anything. He's got, Rowan Wick, who got a few shots, I guess, but other than that, not much going on there. So I definitely like some Craig Kimbrel. If you want to go even deeper with Kimbrel, his CSW was still 35.3% last year on the entire season. So that's pretty promising to me. His deserved barrels is only 11.7%, which is still high. But when you look on his season numbers, his barrel rate during the season was 18.5%. So that 7% drop off, it adds up after a while. So there's definitely some things I like about Kimbrel to improve on going into next year, and I'll definitely be jumping on that train. So I'm with you there. Plus, pick 181. This is where we're getting to the point where you can start taking some chances, and he's one of the few guys around that point in the draft that actually pretty much is locked into his job unless he screws it up again. So I'll take my chances with Kimbrel at that point in the draft. Who is your second closer?
Well, there's not really any guys in around 11 to 20 outside of Kimbrel that I'm really that into right now. I just see weaknesses in all of them. I mean, when Rosenthal signs, assuming he's the closer somewhere, That'll be interesting. Although, yeah, the walk rate, always concerns me a little bit. And then the guys who actually have a shot at closing, Yates is going to go way up the board. But like Montero, Montero's swinging strike rate last year was like under 9%. And so I don't know if he's actually good. So I put Alex Colome here. I haven't drafted him at all this year, just because when you're drafting relief pitchers, you want to know that they have access to saves. But I'm going to assume that he's going to end up in a place where he'll probably be the closer. Where that is exactly, I'm not sure. But I kind of included this one in here to make the point that I made with Brad Hand, which I didn't anticipate making because I came in kind of being down on Brad Hand, which is just generally like I kind of dig the guys that seem to have a job and maybe a little bit of cushion. And Colome was this guy last year, and Melanson was this guy last year, where the skills don't jump off the page necessarily, but they're good enough pitchers where they have never really been bad, And so that type of consistency, I think, is important. And you throw them in kind of the closer role, and you never know what can happen. And when you're not spending a lot of draft capital on them, then you're not as attached to them, and you're not losing out as much when they inevitably fail. So that's all to say. I wouldn't draft Alex Colome right now, but I think that type of pitcher are the guys that I want to go after. Like Brandon Kinsler last year is another example, which I didn't know he was going to have like a negative 3% K- walk rate. I just knew that he was going to have saves, and he's never really been bad anytime he's ever pitched. So
no, I like that. The Colomes, even Rosenthal, is suspect as the walk rate is. It's this handful of guys you get to this point in the draft. Are you willing to take the chance? Because more often than not always, but more often than not, these guys are going to sign for a team to be their closer. So that's just something to keep in mind. When they do sign, like we just mentioned Kirby Yates and some others, they will move up the draft board quite a bit. So I don't mind taking specs at this point in the draft. My second guy in this range is Richard Rodriguez of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Similar to Kimbrel, there's ups and downs when you look at his overall profile. Big-time strikeout guy, strong CSW, gets a lot of swing and miss. But he also gets hit very hard, and he plays with fire. Like, he doesn't walk a lot of guys, so if he does get hit hard, he limits the damage that way, contrary to some other guys we talked about earlier. But the biggest thing for me is he's on the Pittsburgh Pirates, who aren't going to be good, but they're not going to be signing a guy to take his job either. At least they shouldn't be. So it should be his gig unless something crazy happens. And we've seen bad teams like the Pirates still rock and roll a handful of saves. Remember last year, Toby, on a shortened season, the Pirates' closing situation due to injuries was one of the most fabbed position I think we've ever taken chances on. I think there was Kyle Crick at one point and a bunch of other guys, Keona Kella and Richard Rodriguez and a handful of others that were all getting picked up and dropped because they went on the IL, and so much fun in Pittsburgh. So it's Richard's job, and I will gladly be taking him in the picks around 200 or so going into drafts as my most likely closer to on my draft day. So
yeah,
that's what I like.
I love that shout too, and I think what you highlighted about, he got hit really hard and he was still really successful. I think that's really nice because, that's always one of your concerns. But given what you just said about him, I think that's great. My concern recently has been whether he'll end up with that job, just because of some rumblings coming out of Pittsburgh about how, they didn't want to give him the job necessarily. So, but I think it's a great shot. I like him a lot.
Well, that would be so Pirates to screw it up because you got Kyle Crick and Michael Feliz. Like, there's options there. I get it, but not as good as Rodriguez. So let's hope. Yeah. Let's hope. So we're going to do our late round flyers. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the pod, there's a lot of listener questions on later targets, and there's a lot of confusing or up in the air situations. So we're going to run through the gamut real quick and give some Twitter answers on this. So like Baltimore, for instance, are we on board that Hunter Harvey's the guy? Or are you a Tanner Scott, Cesar Valdez, Dylan Tate? Who are you looking at in Baltimore if you had to take one?
Not really. I'm kind of avoiding. I don't want to offend you greatly, but I just don't see the incentives either for having Hunter Harvey be in that closer role. I think last year, who was it? It was like Larkins and then Sulzer, and they just really moved around that closer role a lot. I don't think there's any reason for them to be tied to a single closer in that situation, and the closing opportunities are going to be minimal. So I'm just kind of staying away generally. Yeah,
I still like Harvey because he was injured last year for the most part when he lost his gig. But Pick 371 has a little appeal to me. The other situation you can like is Tanner Scott is going around pick 560. So if you're in deeper drafts, I don't hate that as a speculative go for the Baltimore situation because it will get volatile at times there. And he's a lefty, so if they want to play matchups, he can sneak in there as well. Boston, we have Matt Barnes. They just picked up Adam Ottavino. If you had to go somewhere there, where are you going?
I mean, I think I'm probably still going with Barnes. I can't remember what Ottavino's lefty-righty splits are, but that would be interesting to know. I mean, Barnes was pretty good towards the end of last year. Seemed to figure out the control issues a little bit. I think there was a pitch mix change in there. My only question is, if I'm remembering correctly, the previous seasons, I don't think Joey Cora was ever really. I don't know if he used him in super high leverage spots or not. So a few questions about that. I think if Renicky, which we knew he wasn't going to stick around, but if he had stuck around, he gave him the closer roll down the stretch and he really thrived. So it's a good scenario. I think, the challenge is right now you're paying for Barnes about what you're paying for Kimbrel and some guys with solid situations. So I think if we get indications that he is the closer, then I don't mind going after him. I think he kind of fits the profile, generally speaking. But, for time being, I'm not really sure who it is. And then Ottavino, he wasn't that good last year, was he? Yeah, no, 5.89.
He was banged up. For some reason, I was talking with someone today. I feel like he was on the COVID train last year. I could be wrong, but I thought there was something that took place that kind of limited his overall experience.
Yeah.
Could be wrong.
Let's see. I wonder if I'm going to check out his career splits and just see.
I pulled him up right here.
Oh yeah,
so he gets righties than lefties.
He gets crushed versus lefties at 343 career WOBA. So I think that's super problematic with the new rules around 3-batter minimum and being in that closer spot. I'm not that into it. Maybe I'm more into Barnes now than I was previously because I think he's clearly kind of the guy. So that's what I would say. I'm a little bit more a fan of a Barnes than coming into it. Still some hesitation. I could see the Red Sox signing Colome. That's one.
That would be a phenomenal landing spot.
He could kind of fit in. So
yeah, I would like that a lot. And a little deeper, lefty 21% K rate, 13% walk, righties 31%, 9% walk, and to top it off, home run per fly ball for lefties 14.2%, righties 9.6. So. Yeah, lefties.
Frisbee,
Yep, lefties get to him quite well, as you mentioned. So, yeah, I'm with you. Barnes is the guy for now. I've been a Darwinzian Hernandez guy late in like super deep drafts. If you need him, I think he finds his way there because he's a lefty. If you look at their roster resource bullpen right now, it's almost all righties. So, I think Hernandez gets his shot to make an impact eventually. But for now, it's Barnes. Hopefully, they sign someone like you said, though. That'd make the most sense. We know the Yankee situation, so we're good there. Tampa Bay, you got Peter Fairbanks, you have Nick Anderson, you have Diego Castillo. Fairbanks didn't get a save last year, but he pitched very well out of the bullpen. Anderson had 6 saves, Castillo had 4, Alvarado's gone, he had a handful. So it was a 3-headed monster there last year. How are you going about it this year? Nick Anderson is still an expensive price tag, but you can Castillo and Fairbanks relatively cheap.
Yeah, I mean, Anderson's so good, but again, do not see the incentives for them to give him saves. I think they'll handle it like they have in the past. I do like Castillo a little bit. I think he's above Fairbanks, in the pecking order. He was pretty clearly the closer for them, during the playoffs, like kind of in crunch time and when it mattered. So I lean towards Castillo in this situation, not as the best pitcher, obviously, but as the guy who by the end of the season may have the most saves. But again, generally in a void. I'm not sure I have any of them on any of my teams, honestly.
Yeah, Diego's going around a little after pick 300. Fairbanks around 420. Nick Anderson in the early ones. So it is Nick Anderson's a guy I just haven't had anything of. He's an elite pitcher, like you said, but Diego's a guy I don't mind snagging later in drafts if you basically are punting saves in a draft champions. You just want to load up on guys later. I think Castillo's interesting because he's going to get his weeks where he gets a lot of saves, or if you don't have enough starters you want that week, so on and so forth. He could plug into an interesting spot for you. And Fairbanks is a long shot option. But I'm with you on Castillo. He'd be a guy I'd be looking to for sure. Real quick on Toronto, there's Kirby Yates, obviously got signed there. He should start out as a closer. Jordan Romano, Rafael Dulles. Are you still sold on Yates, or are you taking a chance on Romano or Dulles?
No, I mean, I think Yates is the closer there. So, I had a little bit of hope for Dulles, but, that's kind of out the window. Dulles was really good down the stretch. I mean, really good, phenomenal when Romano was out. So, and he's older and, he's already on a contract. So I was leaning in his direction, but I think Yates is the closer there.
Yeah, I was big on Romano, so I'm a lot of my shares are hoping things change, but we'll see how that goes. Cleveland, we mentioned Karinchak. We're both really not a big fan of. If you had to go somewhere, you have Nick Wittegren, Emmanuel Clase. I picked up Wittegren and late in a lot of drafts so far. So what are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I like that shout. I don't see why Karinchak would be it. One guy that's not on that list who I think should be is Phil Maton or Maton. He was absolutely incredible last year. I mean, I think he really flew under the radar. He's been a guy that I've been drafting in like pretty much every draft Champions League I'm in. 17.1% swinging strike rate last year, 27.1% K- walk rate. Even with a 415 BABIP, didn't give up a ton of home runs. When you look at his like pitch level metrics, they're nasty. What was his four-seam swinging strike rate? 19.1% swinging strike rate on his four-seam fastball and a 40% chase rate. Has 4 pitches. Well, I guess 3 pitches. He doesn't really throw that sinker all that often. That are generating a decent swinging strike. So I really like him. He's pretty young, 27. So maybe there's the same kind of incentive issue there. But just like a deep league spec who, if you have him on your team, I don't think he's going to hurt you, and he could be really good if he were to find himself entering that situation.
Yeah, definitely a possibility. Detroit, always up in the air. Brian Garcia, Gregory Soto, Buck Farmer even got chances last year. Joe Jimenez is still around, even though he struggled tremendously towards the end of last year. Yeah, I'm pretty much staying away. I've found myself maybe a Gregory Soto or a Brian Garcia like in one of the last rounds in a draft to take a shot. But overall, I'm kind of steering clear. What are you doing with Detroit?
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally steering clear. Here's another situation where maybe a column A makes sense, if they go out and get a guy. But for me, the one guy that interests me that I've gotten in a couple draft champions, maybe just one, is Cisnero. He's older. I think he's 32. Was really good last year. I mean, 3.03 ERA, the 10.3 K per nine. Limited the walks a little bit. When you look at some of the other guys in that back there, I mean, Brian Garcia 5 K per nine and a 4.2 walk per nine. Buck Farmer 5.9 K per nine. Even Gregory Soto, who was really good for a lot of last year, he walked 5 per nine. So Cisnero is really the only guy there. I mean, no offense to Joe Jimenez, but he's never been good. I mean, he's never been good. So I don't know why he would all of a sudden become good. Cisnero, he just seems like the most complete package in that bullpen right now. But again, could be a scenario where I think it makes sense for teams like Detroit where, with the expanded playoffs, potentially maybe they have a shot, probably not. I mean, I kind of like the rotation a little bit, but you sign a guy like Column A maybe to like 1 year, $8 million contract. And then if he does well for you that year and you're not in the running, then you can trade him at the deadline for something, and if he does well and you're in it, then that works out too. So, again, I like Cisnero the most, but I'm generally avoiding the situation.
Yeah, definitely. Kansas City Royals got Greg Holland, who they brought back, who's obviously going to get the spots until they trade him, if they trade him. Josh Stallmont was waiting in the wings. I was a big fan of that situation, but looks like it's Greg Holland's deal. Are you on board on that?
Yeah, I like Greg Holland a lot. Ever since he's been signed, I've been picking him up in a lot of DCs around pick 220 to 250. I think everything he did last year was legit. There's nothing that really jumps out at me as a huge concern. The home run per nine was very low, but he's been at that number before in the past. Kauffman Stadium is obviously a nice place to be. 21.4% K minus walk rate. He bumped that swinging strike rate up to 13.1%. He was getting some chases, which is really nice. And I think a lot of it, if I remember correctly, was a pitch mix change. Yeah, so he was down 10% on the fastball. He had about a 1.5 mile per hour velo jump on that. Threw the slider 50% of the time. So he bumped his usage of that pitch up about 7.5, 8%. And then he was throwing a curveball a little bit more as well. And I want to say both of those pitches have always been really good pitches for him, just from a batted ball perspective. Let me just double check before I submit that to the record. But yeah, so 52% ground ball rate on that's his forcing actually. So 47.7% on that slider, 57.1%, on his curveball. So it actually doesn't look like, well, in the past they used to be really good, but maybe not. So I won't go with that narrative, but yeah, I mean, overall, like the increased usage of that slider up to 17.6% with a 43.2% O swing on that, and he's throwing that 50% of the time. I think that's really nice, and he can throw it for strikes too, which I think is great.
All right, let's head to Oakland. You got Jake Diekman, Lou Trevino's there, JB Wendelken. I think Diekman definitely starts out with the job. I think Wendelken is kind of a hidden gem there. Trevino's very good, but I think they like Trevino in higher leverage spots. That's why I kind of think he stays out of the closer's role. But that's my 2 cents. So I've been grabbing some Diekman here and there, and then if you're in the super late rounds, I think Wendelken's very much in play. Big time strikeout stuff with both of them. They do have their walk issues from time to time, but they definitely know how to limit the damage. 13 holds from Diekman last year. I know we're talking saves here, but that just shows you he can come in and shut the door when it matters. Also a lefty specialist at times, but was very good versus righties as well. So Diekman is going around pick 318, and Wendelken is at pick 468. So both of them come at nice values, and I like them both if you're in deep leagues, but if you have to pick just one, I'm going Diekman. What are you doing in Oakland?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Diekman did do really well. I was really impressed. I did not realize how well he did last year. Oakland has said that they're going to go with him, so I don't see a reason not to believe that. He's 34. I think he's on like year 2 of a contract. I don't think he's like going to be, who has to worry about arbitration. So there's that piece of the equation. Trevino was fine. Wendelken was really good as well. I think Weems was another guy that actually jumped out at me a little bit. Maybe walks a few too many guys, but I want to say he limited contact really, really well.
He had a 17% barrel rate.
Weems did?
Or 12%, sorry.
12%. Yeah, I should know that because it's right in front of me. This is actually a new resource. I've never used this before. It's great. It's phenomenal. I can't remember what it was then about Weems that I was super interested in. Maybe I think it was that I was diving in. He's got a pitch. What was it? It was his changeup, maybe. I want to say, I can't remember. It was something about his repertoire that jumped out at me, and it's not working. So while you look at it, I'm gonna look this up because I want to say he had a pitch mix change midway through. Yeah, his splitter had a 30% swinging strike rate on it and a 41.4% O swing. He couldn't get it in the zone, but when he's generating that many swings and misses and he's getting that many chases, I want to say he started throwing it a lot more. I was doing a dive, in my DCs. So with his 10-game rolling average, let's see what it was. Why was I interested in him? I know this is enthralling stuff, maybe. 13.1% swinging strike rate, dominant in the zone, 76.1%. 31% strikeout rate, 12% walk rate. He got his strikeout rate into the mid 30% at certain points. So anyways, long story short, I think there's a lot of arms in the Oakland bullpen. I think Diekman's the most likely one, but I think there's a lot of potential speculations in a DC. Don't forget about Weems as like a 50th round guy, just in case.
One more I'll throw out, and it's one I'm not on, but he's at pick 748. If you look at Greg Jewett's closers charts, he has a closer to potentially share time with Diekman or take Diekman over at some point, Birch Smith. So just a name if you want to go there. And he does a ton of work on it. Yeah. So like I trust his word. If he's throwing a guy out like that, he's done the research to at least justify it. So keep that in mind. If you're super deep league, 750-ish draft pick, Birch Smith is a guy to keep in mind. I won't even try to give you analysis on that because I know not much about him. But definitely something to keep in mind. Texas, I know Leclerc's pretty much the guy there for now. Seattle, Rafael Montero. So let's move to the National League. We mentioned Will Smith as a top 20.
One thing about Texas bullpen is, Leclerc, definitely Leclerc, but Joely Rodriguez is a guy. I don't think Jonathan Hernandez is going to see that closer role anytime soon. Rangers went out of their way to keep him out of that spot. He's a young guy. Arbitration, again, what are the financial incentives that guys have? Rodriguez was nasty last year. 2.13 ERA, 103 WHIP, 17 strikeouts in about 13 innings, 23.1% came on his walk rate, good in the zone. So that's another one where I think if Leclerc struggles, which we know he certainly can, I think Rodriguez is maybe the next man up there as opposed to Hernandez is the one thing I'd add.
Yeah, that's not a bad one. I know a lot of us do like Hernandez, but Joely's a pick 637, so definitely someone later in drafts to keep an eye on. To the National League, Will Smith, top 20 relief pitcher off the board, but Chris Martin is in line to close. I know you like Chris Martin. Are you still on board as Chris Martin as the Atlanta guy, assuming they don't bring Melanson or someone?
I'm on board.
I know you like Chris Martin.
No, so. I mean, I read in Mining the News, they plan on splitting Will Smith and Chris Martin, kind of play the righty-lefty angle there. Smith already has the contract, so no concerns there, but so does Martin. I mean, they signed him to a two-year deal last year. What I love about him is he doesn't walk anybody. He never walks guys, and he's really good. I mean, he's really good. He doesn't have a dominating fastball, but he can get it done. He's done that for a couple of years now, and I think he's going around pick like 415 in drafts. So for 50% of the shares of saves for the Braves, I'm good ratios. I'm in on that.
Yep, Chris Martin at pick 364 now, moving on up. But yes, still a good value, no doubt about that. We go to Miami, who just signed Anthony Bass that people assume might close. He's listed as a co-closer with Yimi Garcia, who was decent towards the end of last year, and he took over the closer's role for Kinsler, who was injured or lost his favor last year. But who are you looking at in Miami? Because Yimi was the guy I kind of looked at, but Anthony Bass been pretty darn good in his time with Toronto and whatnot, and could easily slide in and take some closing situations there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big Yimi fan, like generally speaking, but I think Bass is the guy that they probably signed here, to take over this role. Yimi is 3 years younger. I don't know what his contract situation is. Garcia, so I'd have to look a little bit at that. I mean, I think Yimi's like really good. But I do think that Bass, like if I were to draft them in a DC right now, I would draft Bass over Garcia just because I think he'll get the saves. And I think Garcia being the best reliever in that bullpen and them using him in the highest leverage spot probably makes sense just from a team perspective. And we saw last year how even though Kinsler was, he was fine, he was good, the results were good, he was awful from a skills perspective. Despite that, they still stuck with him with Garcia there. So I would lean towards Bass in this scenario with Garcia being the better pitcher.
Yeah, Garcia free agent after at 2022, so I think after this season. So that's something to keep in mind. He's going around pick like 314, Bass 620. So I'll definitely be taking my shots on Bass in some of these drafts coming up. I think he'll get his fair shake, as you mentioned. If you look at Greg Jewett here, he's got Bass in there without Yimi helping at all. So be interesting to see how that pans out. We go to the Philadelphia Phillies. They picked up Archie Bradley. They traded for Jose Alvarado. Hector Neris is still in town. This seems like a disaster in the making here. Like I loved Alvarado at one point. Rumor has it Archie Bradley's going to close. Hector Neris had his ups and downs, but still got the job done more often than not. It's a disaster. So what are you doing with Philadelphia?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a situation where I'll kind of monitor who's going where. And I think I want to be all over Neris if if it looks like Bradley's closing. I've never been a huge fan of Bradley. He just doesn't have the strikeout stuff that a closer traditionally does. But he has, I mean, arguably, I mean, he was solid last year. And Philly certainly obviously likes him. Neris was much better second half of the year last year. He really got it going. I think his velo bumped up a little bit after the abbreviated spring training or summer training or whatever you want to call it. One name just to keep an eye on is Connor Brogdon. Shout out to the Baseball HQ forecaster. I wasn't aware of Brogdon until I read his profile, but really like Brogdon a lot. Less so now with Bradley there, but my kind of strategy earlier on was to get Neris. I have like 5 shares of Neris in my DCs, and then to go with Brogdon as the backup there. So just not a name to draft, maybe in a DC, but just a name to keep an eye on as the season progresses, depending on how he's doing. He had the highest strikeout rate of that group, 13.5%. Not a low walk rate, but lower than Neris's at 4. So he did well in his short time, and outside of Alvarado has the fastest fastball. So some things to keep in mind.
Yeah, no, that's not bad at all. I'm still enjoying the Hector Neris discount. I'm going to keep snagging that up in drafts because I think he'll get his. But screw Archie Bradley. That makes me very angry. With Washington, I mentioned Tanner Rainey. I'd still keep an eye on him, but I'm with you, Brad Hand. They signed him for a reason, so keep that in mind. Chicago, we got Kimbrel.
Can we talk about Daniel Hudson for a second?
Sure. What do you got?
And how sad I am that he isn't getting the closer role. 14.6% swinging strike rate, 18.5% K- walk rate. Like, he was really good. He just gave up 2.6 home runs per 9 and had a home run per fly ball rate. What was it? 21.4%. That's what happened to Daniel Hudson last year in a small sample size. I was really hoping he was going to get a chance. I have him in quite a few places too, but sad me.
Cincinnati, you got Amir Garrett, Lucas Sims, your boy TJ Antone. All of these guys would not shock me if they come away. This feels like Tampa Bay in the NL Central. Like, these guys, they could make matchups with Garrett and Sims. Antone, you've made your case for him a few times. What are you doing with this situation?
I mean, I think they're all really great options. I think you see Garrett as the least likely, just because he's a lefty, and I don't really think they have other lefties in that bullpen that are jumping to mind. That they probably do, but none that I'm thinking about right now. So I would lean towards Sims. I still think that TJ Antone has a chance, especially if Castillo or Gray are traded, to end up in the rotation. I mean, he was just ridiculously good, and he'll be ridiculously good, wherever he ends up. I just think he's really still underrated. I know Hoffman's in here. I actually like him for the rotation. I'm a big fan of Jeff Hoffman. We've talked about him on the Starting Pitcher Show. So if I were to grab one guy here, it would be Lucas Sims. But it's a tough situation. I also don't think they're an orthodox team, so I think they're going to play around with matchups and things like that and leverage spots.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Garrett's a phenomenal pitcher, but the leverage and the situational pitching makes more sense. So Lucas Sims, I picked 321. I like quite a bit. Antoine's going right after him in drafts right now. But Sims, the overall repertoire is very good. Alex Fass has gifted him quite a bit and broken it all down. I believe he was on their show actually last year as well. So there's good stuff with Lucas Sims, strikeout-wise, the overall goodies. So I like him quite a bit. We talked about Pittsburgh. We talked about Milwaukee. St. Louis. This is a fun one. Alex Reyes, Andrew Miller, Giovanni Gallegos, Jordan Hicks coming back from injury. My goodness. I like the upside of Alex Reyes. If they want to roll with him, I think he might be the filthiest of the options. And he's a guy I've been kind of staring at in a lot of drafts to take. Otherwise, I'm just kind of like Andrew Miller's not even getting drafted in a lot of leagues. Giovanni Gallegos, people love. What are you doing with this situation?
I mean, I think Gallegos is probably the best pitcher for me, but I've actually have I have a few shares of Jordan Hicks. I just think that whenever he's been in a situation where he can close, the Cardinals have gone with him. And normally I'd be like, well, what are the incentives for a young guy in his situation? But they started him out in the closer role 2 years ago. And then before the Tommy John surgery, they had him in the closer role as well. And he was actually much better that season from a skills perspective. He's still, the velocity is going to be great. All the reports out of the spring are great. The interviews that I've seen with Schilt, he said that, as long if Hicks is healthy and looks okay, that he'll be in that role. So maybe they manage his workload a little bit, but I kind of see him. I don't mind him at all. And then I think I like pairing him with Reyes because, potential that he's the closer, but I think there's also the potential that maybe he's able to unlock, something in the rotation or even middle relief. I mean, the skills are off the charts. So as long as he's healthy, I think he's going to contribute to your fantasy team in one way or another. So I kind of like that bullpen situation because I can get Hicks and then maybe get one of the other guys that kind of falls by the wayside in drafts or falls a little bit deeper in drafts.
I like the Hicks call there. He's good around pick like 240. Gallegos around 280. And then Alex Reyes like 386. I think that's why I keep ending up with a lot of Reyes. It's kind of the idea, if you have a jumbled mess, take the cheapest piece of the jumbled mess. That's just kind of my thought process there. But Hicks is a guy I liked a lot going into last season. So if things pan out properly, sure. But Reyes, it's kind of the combo, like you said. If you take him in a DC, you might get some closing early. He might go into the rotation. And if stuff's good enough to be a pretty good starter, or he could be a long man in like a opener type situation. There's a lot of possibilities for Reyes, like you said, to help your fantasy team out. And I picked 386. I like that quite a bit. So the guy's electric. And a fastball going around close to 98 miles an hour. Strike rate 12.1 K per nine. Walks have always been an issue with him, but health has always been an issue as well. But when he is healthy, 28.9% hard hit rate's pretty darn good. So I like Alex Reyes quite a bit, hoping he either gets the closing situation or put him in the rotation for the St. Louis Cardinals. Arizona Diamondbacks, you have Stefan Crichton is here. You have Kevin Ginkel, who got chances last year. It's an overall messy situation there in the desert, but it looks like it's Crichton's job to lose right now. I'm probably staying away from it from the most part, but what say you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind Crichton. I haven't drafted him at all. He had an interview earlier this year where he was kind of, they asked him about being the closer, and his response to me kind of indicated that he doesn't see himself in that position long term. So I don't know if those are conversations he's had with the team or not, but he just was kind of saying like, I don't have to be the closer. I can contribute to the team, and if I'm coming in the 8th inning or these different spots. And so to me, it was kind of, I don't know, for some reason that was a little bit unnerving. And I also think he doesn't have traditional closer stuff. He doesn't strike guys out as much, but he has been solid the last couple of years. But again, I see this as a scenario where maybe, one of the guys who's left on the market ends up going to Arizona on like a discounted deal and, with a shot to close and maybe a shot to join a contender at the trade deadline or something like that. But I'm kind of staying away so far. But if we get to the point of the season where, we hear Crichton is the closer, then I have no problem grabbing him, where he's going right now, if not a little bit ahead of that, if he's got access to saves.
Yeah, Ginkel, outside of having walk issues, is very intriguing, but the walk issues are a massive problem as well. So, but he's like picking around 640 in drafts, so it at least crosses my mind with him. It's just such a mess there in Arizona to look at. They make the most sense to sign someone like you said. Colorado, you got Daniel Bard, great story last year. He looks to get the spot to start. You have Michael Givens, a couple other guys hanging around there. It's Coors pitchers. Are you taking the chance on a Daniel Bard at pick 291, or are you just saying, you know what, it's Coors?
Yeah, I'll totally take that like in a traditional draft. I'm not necessarily targeting with DCs just because I think there's guys who are going a little bit later, like Leclerc and others, who I like maybe a little bit more just because they don't pitch in cores. But I think Bard was solid. I mean, there's nothing in his profile that concerns me overly. I mean, he doesn't have the elite numbers that maybe you want from a traditional closer, but even though his walks were a little high last year, I don't know if the numbers support that. He was in the zone a lot. He got chases outside the zone. And I want to say that he had one of the lower ball percentages of relief pitchers last year, or of closers last year when I was doing some research. So I don't mind Bard at all. He's the guy that I would target in here. I would stay away from some of the other guys. It's just funny to me, like some of the trades they make, like, picking up Stevenson for Hoffman, which is whatever, right? They're both kind of, I mean, Stevenson's been good, but it's like when his dominant pitch is that is that slider. It's like, is he going to be as effective? So I think Bard's got the leash, and again, incentives in his favor where he's an older guy and they don't really have to worry about arbitration with him. So I don't mind taking Bard. I haven't drafted him yet, but it's just because I think some of the options going later I like a little bit more.
Yeah, I haven't found myself drafting him at all. It's been tough to stomach that one at that point in time. San Diego Padres, you got Drew Pomeranz, who was outstanding last season. Emilio Pagan's there. They're still rumored to be in the Rosenthal sweepstakes, but for now, you got Pomeranz, you got Pagan. I've been looking to grab Pomeranz at certain points in drafts. I think he's that good, even if he's not the closer. What he does as a reliever to your roster is outstanding. Pick 251. So he's a guy I do have targeted as a closing option for me. What are you doing with San Diego?
Yeah, I'm heavily invested in Pierce Johnson, actually. He had one of the highest CSWs last year. He was pretty dominant over the course of the season. I think Pomeranz is fine. I agree. I think when he pitches, he's really good. Little bit of a concern. His velo went up last year, and then he had the injury. And so I worry a little bit about that from his perspective. I think Pagan is a great speculative ad for saves as well. It's kind of another scenario where, maybe Pomeranz makes the most sense as the guy who's most likely to end up as the closer, if not Rosenthal, but where I'd much rather target the guys going later on that I think are really skilled and may make sense as closers if they're not going with one specific guy, or if they put Pomeranz in situations where he's highest leverage or faces lefties more often.
Yeah, Pomeranz around pick 250, Pagan at 437 definitely justifies a shot. I don't hate that at all with Pagan at that point in the draft. The Giants' last one here, closer committee. Roster resource has no idea, but neither do we. Reyes Maranta, for me, if he's healthy, he is the guy, but that's a big if right now. Tyler Rogers struggled early on, actually finished the season pretty darn good. So that was a tough one. You got Jarlin Garcia, who they brought over. You got Matt Whistler. I'm kind of staying away unless it's a really deep league and you want to take a shot on a Reyes Maranta or something, but what are you doing here?
Yeah, Maranta seems most likely to be the guy from everything I've seen, but he's coming off an injury and he had the major walk issues. The last 2 seasons, 13.4% walk rate, 14.1% walk rate, and the strikeout rate is good, but it's not necessarily fantastic. So I've been kind of speculating more on Whistler or Whistler, whatever it is, only because, he's an older guy. He was really successful last year going heavy slider with the Twins, was a really effective reliever. They let him go, but he's on a 1-year, $1.15 million contract. So he's only got that 1-year contract. If he gets saves, he can be a piece they move at the deadline if they're not competing. If they are competing, he's a key part of that bullpen. So it may be a situation where, I imagine he has pretty bad splits though, now that I'm thinking about it. So it may be a situation where it's a little bit more, like dependent on who's up. Yeah, he's got pretty bad splits. Another like Frisbee guy with their slider, but I don't mind him just because I think everything being equal, I think he might be able to get some shots.
Yeah, it's going to be Kapler at his finest with that bullpen. I don't trust anybody to run away with it unless something changes dramatically in spring training. All right, some listener questions.
Has your opinion of Kapler changed at all because of how good they were last year, or do you think it was in spite of him that they were good?
I'm not going to say he didn't do some good things, but I think I'm more in line with what Farhan's doing. He's putting this team together that can, scrape things together. That I guess they're more of a scrappy bunch that not flashy but can play baseball.
Yeah, tough at bats.
Yeah, and I give him more credit for that than Kapler. Maybe it's just because I have bad feelings for Kapler. I don't know, but like they're looks like they're going to sign Tommy La Stella. That is the total Farhan move. It's like we already have Solano, they already have Flores, so everyone's like, well, what are they going to put La Stella? It's Farhan built the Dodgers. All the headaches we have as fantasy owners with the Dodgers roster. He's going to do that with the Giants because he doesn't care about your fantasy team. La Stella makes the Giants a much better baseball team. Yeah. So it's just one of those little deals that you're going to have to Solano's pretty much going to be obsolete possibly. Flores is more of a utility guy again. maybe platoons with Estella. A lot of things to be determined there, but it definitely muddies the water. But he does not care.
They've got a lot of position flexibility there too, like with Flores and him. Yeah,
it's what they love to do. And you got to think about it. After, I don't know what the length of Listella's deal, but there's a lot of money leaving the team after this year. A lot of money. So it's gonna be really interesting. Listener questions, and we answered a lot of these by doing a little exercise there as part of the exercise thought process. But Brian Vogel asked, Miami, Oakland, SF, Cleveland, Texas, thoughts on closers there. We just hit all of those up, Brian. So just rewind about 5-10 minutes and get the whole rundown. And then what late round arms are you looking at in DCs, Toby? I know you mentioned some names there, but what ones have you been kind of circling as you've been drafting, if you don't want to give away all your secrets?
Late names that I've been going after. Pierce Johnson, although I haven't been really getting him that late because I think there's a little hype train on him going. Phil Maton is a guy that I had. Connor Brogdon I've been getting a lot of. Couple maybe of Jose Cisnero. Who else have I been looking at? I like Brent Suter a lot. I mean, he's not really a closer, but he is a relief pitcher. I mentioned him. So those are some of the guys that I do like that are coming to the front of my mind right now. But I think that's one of the things is just like, I kind of wish I had more Joely Rodriguez, to be honest with you. I'm just thinking that I got my first I drafted Leclerc for the first time in my last draft. I don't know if I drafted Joely Rodriguez as well, but that feels like a really good combo to have, honestly. Like in a DC would be like Leclerc followed by Rodriguez because he's going so much later. I like those types of guys where you can get kind of, we're not good at getting their handcuff, but if their handcuff is high skilled, so there's still some utility to them, even if they're not the closer, and then you have the potential that they could shift into the closer. I think that's a really nice spot. I should have been a little bit more strategic in thinking about those things. Oh, Scott Barlow too on Kansas City. I know I liked Greg Holland a lot, but Barlow was really good, and the results weren't, I think, as indicative of how good of a pitcher he was last year, just from like a swinging strike perspective, K-minus walk rate perspective. So he's another guy where I think he's falling now that Greg Holland was drafted, and so he's a guy that you can kind of pick up as well in like maybe the mid 400s, late 400s now, because it looks like Holland has the job there.
Yeah, a few for me, Anthony Bass, but that's going to probably come up. I'm surprised it actually hasn't yet. So that's one to keep an eye on there.
Does that include since he was signed? Because he was only signed last week, right?
Yeah, I'd have to shrink it down because I did the whole month of January. Mm-hmm. Let me do a quick exercise.
What's his early pick on what you have?
Let me do this real quick. Bass. His early pick's 383. So there you go. Yep.
Okay.
That's moving on up big time. But a couple other ones that I know I've been looking at. If I didn't get Pomeranz, we did talk about Pagan. I do have him in a couple spots in best balls. I like Alex Reyes, like I talked about later in drafts. And then in the American League side of things here, Nick Whittegren for Cleveland, I've been grabbing late in drafts. Enoli Paredes, kind of to your thought process, if they might not take over the closer's role, but if they're in, they're still helping you a lot, and they could close for Houston. Mm-hmm. Paredes has some interesting stuff, so I've been targeting him late as well, among a few others. So those are kind of the main ones for me. But there's going to be a lot when you get, like, how it goes, Toby. These guys that are asking questions know when you get late in those drafts and it's your turn to pick on that 2 to 4 hour clock, you just start looking at names and start researching. Well, what do we have here? Oh, what do we have here? And eventually you start having a pool that you just like, these are my guys, and we're just going to roll with it. Dave Petroziello asks, I feel that Tampa will use Anderson most for high leverage, but he'll get a handful of saves. I think Fairbanks is the guy there. We discussed Fairbanks and Diego Castillo. You still think it's Castillo, right?
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be a guy there, but I think Castillo, for me, seems like the most likely to end the season with the most saves.
Yeah, I think
I think he uses an opener sometimes, and even in the playoffs, like Castillo was pretty solidly their closer.
Yep, I'm with you. Zach Roto from the Draft Champagnes podcast. Deep league stabs I'm researching and may draft but haven't yet. Justin Topa, Ryan Hendricks. Thoughts, if none? Who are some guys in your Raiders that you don't have any of yet? Yeah, I'm going to be honest, never even looked at those guys. Do you have any thoughts?
Topa, I just remember Topa has a really nasty pitch. He's on the Brewers, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah, Brewers, 12.6% swinging strike rate, only had 7 2/3 innings. I feel like he has, let me just check really quickly in the repertoire. Maybe it's a changeup. I think maybe he has another really dominant changeup. No, slider, 20% swinging strike rate. I mean, I think he's fine. Velo at 97.9, which is obviously nice, and the sinker generates a lot of ground balls. So definitely an interesting one, Zach. That seems great. Who is the second one?
Ryan Hendricks.
Huh.
Yeah.
How do you spell Hendricks?
Like Jimi Hendrix, Hendrix. He's got a minor league profile.
Oh, he's got a minor league profile.
AA Cincinnati Reds.
I mean, Zach's on top of it, so I'm assuming he's probably on like the 40 man. Certainly possible. Certainly possible. Last in AA. His ATC projections are all right. The strikeouts seem a little low for what you might want to be working with, but anything's possible in a 50-round draft champions.
Yep, anything's possible. Anything is possible. Jake Halusker at the Dust Mite, he asked, Toby, it's pretty clear from your Battle of the Pods draft that you are still employing the late closer shot strategy. Is this something you've always done, or is it a more recent development based on the state of closing in MLB?
I think it's I've only been playing the NFBC for a couple years, so it's hard to say. Like, I can't remember back like when I used to play other leagues. I've never really wanted to invest highly in a closer. I just think it's not an efficient use of draft resources. The reason why you draft closers is for saves. Yes, you want closers who are good, that get you really good ratios, but because the position is so, just by its nature and the number of innings pitched, like there's a lot of variance. So it can be difficult to identify those guys. And each year there are guys that come out of nowhere. Like, think about Devin Williams, right? I'm sure some people were on Devin Williams before the season started, but like, he came out of nowhere to be absolutely dominant. And while he didn't get saves, right? 2 years ago was Liam Hendricks, right? When you got him, when he became the closer, when Trinan went down, and so there's always those types of scenarios. And so I think my philosophy is just, I would rather kind of speculate later on. I still want to get a couple guys that seem to have the job. And so as we get closer to the season, as we learn who the closers are more likely to be, those guys who are going in the 300s and the mid 200s, they're going to move up a little bit. And so I'll probably target them. Like, last year, the guys I was going after were Colomé, were Kinsler, were Kimbrel. That didn't work out great, but guys like that, because I hate to spend an early round draft pick on a closer, when I could get a really good starting pitcher there, or I could get a really good hitter there. It's just kind of, especially for me, since I tend to push catchers up as well, it's kind of like at some point you have to have some weakness. And I think that saves is there. And I think we focus a lot on early season action and fab around saves. But I think people either get, bored, they have enough saves, so they're less competitive on the wire. And as you get past the quarter mark of the season, I think there are opportunities to get cheaper saves or throughout to just kind of speculate and hope that you get lucky and hit on a couple guys. So that's kind of my general approach to it. It's definitely a strategy piece. If you're drafting with me, you won't see me take a closer in probably the first 100 picks. It's not it's not like I have that as a marker, but it's just probably not going to happen the way I build my teams.
Yeah, if you're comfortable in spending fab on closers, there's always saves to be bought. That's always a possibility. So not a problem with that at all. At Breaking Ben _T, do you think waiting to grab your first closer potential save source after pick 200 is a viable strategy? It's definitely viable. It's I know Toby likes to wait. He'll elaborate in a second. I prefer to have at least one guy by then, maybe two that I feel comfortable with. But it is viable. If you feel like you can navigate the minefield, it's viable. So what say you, Toby?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the DCs, with the DCs, that's been my strategy throughout, generally speaking. Like, I think the earliest I've gotten a closer is like around pick 180, something like that. And my general sense with the DCs is, number one, you don't need as many saves because, there's just, you don't have the wire, right? So they're just spread out a little bit more unevenly, or, you just kind of random and pure luck who ends up getting some of these closers after the first ones go. So part of it is that. And so part of it is also like, I'm kind of focused more on winning my league than I am on winning the overall in the DCs, which may sound funny, But my hope is that by focusing on those hitters and by focusing on that starting pitcher early on, I have a really good foundation. And that way, if I luck into getting saves later on, or I'm successful with my late round speculative picks, then that gives me a really good shot maybe to compete. It's always hard to compete in an overall with like thousands of teams, but I feel like that's a better route to competing in the overall than trying to draft saves early. And I believe our friend Rob DiPietro, I think that's what ended up happening with him, where he kind of got Presley and he got Barnes, towards the second half of last year, who really got him a ton of saves down the stretch. And he had a really solid foundation on offense to begin with. So
yeah, I think he also had Bauer and Darvish, or no, Bauer and someone else. Like he hit the nuts pretty good. Like he nailed it. So good for Rob. And speaking of Rob T. Pietro at Deadpool Hitter asks, Toby, we share a similar quest in our never-ending love for deep spec closers for late round DCs. Any thoughts on Dwayne Underwood Jr.? I know we didn't mention him, but for those keeping track at home, I know I saw his name just a second ago on one of these lists, and now it's skipped. I just saw him. Dwayne Underwood.
I've drafted him in a couple of places.
He's on the Chicago Cubs. With
the Cubs, yeah. He's on the Cubs. The results weren't great, but the skills were super nice last year. 23.9% K minus walk, 15% swinging strike rate, 37% O swing. Really, really good. He just had a 408 BABIP and a 218 home run per 9 in only 20 innings. I'm pretty sure he's got two really good pitches. Am I right? 26.7% swinging strike rate on his changeup, 16.7%. Sinker only has 6 pitches. Four seam has a 10.3%. So yeah, I actually have him on a couple DCs. The thought process being, Kimbrel, if he's good, maybe gets traded after this year or in the middle of the year, or if he struggles, Underwood looks like the best relief pitcher in that bullpen who isn't Kimbrel. But I also think he's on the younger side of things. I want to say he's like in his mid-20s. He's 26 right now. So again, the question is like, what is the incentive the team has to kind of plug him in there? So, but I do think that that's a nice deep league spec and a guy that I've added a few times, in my DC so far as kind of like a 50th rounder.
Yeah, not bad at all. Our buddy Yancey Eaton, I hate to do this to you, Yancey, he says, is Nick Anderson lit in 2021? He's going to be a very good closer. Is he pick 145 lit? I don't think so. So what about you, Toby?
Yeah, I think he's going to be a really good pitcher, and he's not going to get you a lot of saves, and everybody who drafted Nick Anderson will be wondering why he doesn't get any more saves.
Yep, pretty much. Rob DiPietro is back, and he has a question for me this time. He says, Bubba, 15 over-under on Wendelken saves. JB Wendelken, we talked about him as a potential later-round target for the Oakland Athletics. I'm going to go under because I think Diekman takes it long enough, but I do think Wendelken gets close to the 10 range. I think maybe a little less than 10, but he's going to get up there barring a Diekman injury. If Diekman gets injured, over easily, but I'm going to go under 15. But I think similar to like Nick Anderson will be better, don't get me wrong. But I think Wendelken's still going to be a very, very good fantasy reliever. Just might not get you all the saves. Got picked 468. I don't hate the spec on him, but just don't expect a massive save season is what I'm thinking there. All right. MLB moving average. Orioles, Hunter Harvey or Cesar Valdez, Toby?
Oh man, I mentioned I'm kind of staying away from that, but let's see. I got to dive in. I feel like Valdez had some pretty nice numbers last year, if I'm remembering correctly.
Oh, you dive in. I'm going Hunter Harvey.
Okay, 13.1% swinging strike rate, 17% K minus walk, nice O swing. Everything looks good from my perspective. I wonder why the K rate was so low given the swinging strike. So he must not be able to get a lot of called strikes, So I think, I'm kind of staying away. So I would just stay away, John. I'm sorry. That would be kind of my general philosophy, just based on what I've seen from the Orioles the past couple of years. And, I don't think either of them is probably the most talented. What was it, Tanner Scott?
I go Tanner Scott over Valdez for sure.
Tanner Scott has like one of the best pitches in baseball with the with his slider, I want to say. I'll look that up while we go to the next one.
The next one, he says, Rockies, could it be Robert Stevenson? It could. I don't think it will be.
Yeah, I just don't love the fact that his most dominant pitch for Stevenson is his slider, and it's not going to be as useful. Yeah, so it wasn't as good last year. In 2019, Tanner Scott had a 26.7% swinging strike rate on his slider, 47.3% O swing. It wasn't as good in 2020, but his fastball swinging strike rate increased by 6%. So I would go Tanner Scott if anybody in that bullpen probably. And Tanner Scott's forcing fastball is 97 miles per hour on average, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, I like Tanner Scott quite a bit the more I've dug into him the last few weeks. Ross at the Shy Bears asked Cleveland, Karinchak or Class A? The answer is Whittegren, but what do you say?
And the answer is Matan or Matt.
There you go.
No, I mean, really, Class A for me, he doesn't make any sense to me either. He's young. There's no incentives there. And he's also not a strikeout guy. That's the thing. Everybody's obsessed with, he's one of these like guys that he's like, people feel like are really into his fastball, but what was he? 22.3% strikeout rate, in 2019 with the Rangers. I don't even think he has any dominant pitches really. Yeah, like his slider had a 9.6% swinging strike rate. His four seam had an 11%. I'm going to pass on that, especially coming off of a season-long injury. I just don't see why they'd put him in that scenario. So I agree. I mean, Whitgren, I probably should be more in on him, just given my thoughts, because he's going so late in drafts. So I agree with Bubba on that one, and Matan if neither one of those guys work out.
He says Detroit, Gregory Soto's gig. I like your Cisnero call, so I don't think it's Soto's gig. You?
I don't think so. I really like Soto last year. He just shows what can happen when you bump up 2 miles per hour in velocity in a given year. And you could sell that really early on in the season too. So just something to look for as we kind of enter the seasons this year. But the walk rate is too high. I'd have to check in on his splits, but he's the only lefty that I can think of that's in that bullpen as well. And so I just don't see – I didn't feel like they wanted him to be there. He blew one save, I think, and they'd never let him see saves again. So I would say no.
The last question he has here, what will Jordan Romano's role be now with Yates in town? I'd still take shots on him, but I'm not as excited. I still think – I'm not completely sold on Yates just yet. I'm still slightly concerned there. But what's your thoughts?
Yeah, middle reliever or part of the trade package with Vlad Jr. to get some pitching.
Mike Carter at MDRC0508. Sort through the St. Louis bullpen. We did that a second ago, so scroll on back a little ways. But I think Reyes has spec obligations, and Toby believes in Mr. Hicks. So
I don't know why I believe in Hicks, honestly, because I've always been a naysayer on him in previous seasons. But
that's what I thought. I remember last year, I think, or the year before he was hurt, I thought I was in on Hicks. You're like, no.
Yeah, well, I mean, he changed it a little bit because his slider, I think, got a lot better. So his swinging,
he's electric when he's healthy.
He is, and also I think there are certain situations that I feel like are just like create gold, and one of them is the Cardinals pitchers. It just seems like whoever they have is like good enough. It's like Adam Wainwright, he sucks, but he's good somehow. And I think part of it is the ballpark. I think it's similar to the A's. It's like people go there and all of a sudden their ERA drops like a point. So I just think it's a really good situation to be in. Or I'm just justifying poor draft capital usage on Jordan Hicks at pick 250.
And then our last question, I think it's a good question to end on, at Torres Takes, asks, how many closers do you aim to have in your starting lineup in a given week, NFBC Roto format? Do you prefer to have a third closer or in there, or a seventh starter? I think it's a very fun question. I'll get your takes first, and I'll give my thoughts as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just depends on who I got on my team. I mean, I think in an ideal world, I have 6 starting pitchers and 3 relief pitchers who are getting saves. But it also depends on matchups and streaming options. So it's kind of like, I mean, in an ideal scenario, right, you have at least 2 guys out of your 6 starters who have 2 start weeks. And then you've got your 3 relief pitchers generating saves for you. More often than not, though, right, you've got like maybe your 2 solid closers or your 2 guys who are getting your saves. And then you've got 6 starters, and then you're kind of rotating, throughout the year between, that seventh starter and that third reliever, depending on who's on your team at that given time and what the matchups are that week. Which is why, especially given like the context of baseball, like those middle relievers can be really effective. I don't recommend drafting them, but I recommend scouring the wire and paying attention to middle relief pitchers and relief pitchers who have really good ratios and really good strikeouts, just to be able to plug in there when you need them. But I think in like an NFBC overall competition, you can't just start 6 starting pitchers and compete in strikeouts. And you also can't start just 2 relief pitchers, generally speaking, and compete in the overall. So you really do need to have that kind of like one blended role that kind of switches off depending on matchups between starting pitcher and relief pitcher. And oftentimes, it won't be as difficult of a decision because, you got a guy who's a closer at that moment in time, and then the regular closer comes back from injury, and then that guy's no longer as useful to you. So just kind of keeping it open and moving around. Sometimes you have 4 relief pitchers in there because when you have access to the saves, you want to bank them when you can, because you can always try to make up the innings, at a later date. So that's what I'll say.
No, I'm with you there. Like, I don't have a set number, but I want to get the saves when I can. I think that's a tremendous point. It's like, if you got 3 guys that are closing, you better have 7 really good pitchers to put out there, because otherwise you're you know how it goes. You leave that one guy, one of the 3 on the bench, he has 4 saves that week or something, and that's going to just crush you. So if he's getting saves, barring like 4 games in Coors or something, and it's not even that bad for a closer compared to a starter, obviously, then it's pretty much I want my closers in there for the most part. The other thing is I think it is a general question. I think just relievers in general, I don't mind having it in there. I know we talked about it as the season gets later. I remember last year, it was the year before, I had like Font from Toronto. He was opening twice a week. He'd open. I would put him in my lineup. He'd be good for like 4 to 5 innings. His ratios would be good. Give me some strikeouts, and we'd work that direction because I got him for $1 on Fab. So you'll see situations like that as the season goes on, that sometimes due to injuries and stuff, relievers that are pitching the 7th and 8th inning might be better options than some starters. So it's not the end all be all. So I don't think there's a set number you need to have. I think it's just more your roster construction, and I prefer to get as many saves as possible. Now, later in the year, if you think you have saves locked up and you want to get your ratios and your strikeouts, then leave saves on the bench, but that's a whole nother conversation.
And one thing I'd recommend in like daily leagues is having a bunch of like high
middle relievers.
Like middle relievers, or even, just really good relievers, even if they're just going 1 inning at a time. Yep. Even if you have a pitch limit, because if you think about it, a starting pitcher gets a win every
5th day, hopefully.
Like 13 innings or something like that, 15 innings, something like that. So you're not really losing out on wins that much, as long as the guy like lucks into a couple of them throughout the course of the season. You're helping your ratios generally. You're helping your K per 9 and your Ks overall. So that's one strategy, outside of this question, that I would recommend employing for folks who are in daily leagues, especially if you have deeper benches. It's a little bit harder when you have shallow benches, but
in deeper leagues, I prefer getting like 2 or 3 stud pitchers, and then almost streaming your last couple starters and getting a bunch of relievers. That's so you're always rotating relievers in your lineup throughout the week. So I like that quite a bit.
I started off my 12-team league last year that I won at my home league, 12-team league, with 3 starting pitchers in a row. And then, because, you
lock up those ratios, and then you don't have to worry about putting like a random 5th starter out there to mess them all up. You can put decent relievers in there to keep them kind of at bay. So, I like that quite a bit. All right, that'll wrap us up this week. Relief pitchers, so much fun. Any final thoughts, Toby?
No, I think relief pitchers are fun. I really enjoy relief pitchers. I think it's a really big opportunity, to really mine for those guys that can take that next step, and not just during the off season. I think it's really critical to be monitoring those leaderboards and paying attention, not just who gets saves or, who's pitching the 8th is really important too, but look for those guys that jump out. Remember, Nick Anderson, in 2019 wasn't on the radar heading into the season. And then he was the best reliever in baseball for 2 consecutive years, right? And that happens every single year. Devin Williams this year. Be monitoring that, and don't be afraid to take speculative ads on guys like that. especially if you see a pathway to save. So I really like relief pitching grinding. Like I love grinding for relievers and, yeah, probably strange in that way.
Well, it's definitely a way to find an edge. That's for sure. Because someone's going to run away with something that will surprise you as the season goes on. So it's definitely something worth grinding for, better than grinding for that fourth outfielder that might catch a job or something. You can definitely grind for the reliever. So that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, it'll be fun when we recap this in February or March and seeing more moves.
See how good we are. We should have like a chart. It says who Bubba thought, who Toby thought, who ended up being it.
How many did we actually get right? Yes, we could have waited. We might have wasted 2 hours on this. No, I was kidding. But we'll see. But everybody, check out Toby on Twitter at DFS Golf Gods. I'm on Twitter at BD We'll be back with you guys next week. But for now,
at DFS Golf Gods.
Oh, sorry, at BD That's the guy I do golf with. That's how it's late.
You can also find me at DFS Golf Gods for sure.
Yes, he's there.
Yeah.
That's Jesse. This is Toby at the Bat Flip Crazy. I am just I'm losing it. I'm sorry. They're all blending together.
Having an infant.
Yes, but it's Bubba and the Bat Flip, episode 68, and relief pitchers are in the books. We'll catch you guys later.
Thanks for listening.